It was a Tuesday evening, one of those mundane nights that blur into the background of life. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my laptop, when I noticed something unusual. My wife, Jane, had forgotten to log out of her Facebook Messenger. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. We'd been married for 8 years, and trust had always been the foundation of our relationship. But something about the way her chat window was open, the little green dot signaling activity, made me pause. I clicked on the messages, and there it was. A thread with a man named Chad, someone I vaguely remembered her mentioning as a coworker. At first, the messages seemed harmless, friendly banter about work projects, office gossip, the usual stuff. But as I scrolled further, my stomach began to twist. The tone shifted. The jokes became flirtatious, the emojis more suggestive. And then I saw it, a message from Chad that made my blood run cold. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. This week has been torture without you. My heart pounded as I read Jane's reply. Same, counting down the hours. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My hands trembled as I scrolled through more messages, each one a dagger to my chest. They'd been meeting up during lunch breaks, texting late at night, even planning a weekend getaway under the guise of a work conference. The evidence was undeniable. My wife was having an affair. For a moment, I wanted to scream, to throw the laptop across the room, to confront Jane the second she walked through the door. But then I remembered my brother Mark and the mess he'd made when he found out his wife was cheating. He'd acted on impulse, yelling, accusing, making threats he couldn't take back. In the end, it only made things worse. He told me once, years later, that he wished he'd been more methodical, that he'd taken the time to think things through instead of letting his anger control him. I didn't want to make the same mistake, so I took a deep breath, closed the laptop, and sat in silence, my mind racing. The betrayal hurt more than I could put into words, but beneath the pain was something else, a simmering anger, a desire to make them pay. Not just Jane, but Chad too. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't going to end with a simple confrontation. If they thought they could shatter my life and walk away unscathed, they were dead wrong. The days after the discovery blurred together in a haze of anger, disbelief, and heartache. I replayed the messages in my mind over and over, each word cutting deeper than the last. Jane continued her routine as if nothing had happened, smiling at me over breakfast, chatting about her day, even asking about my work. It was surreal, watching her act so normal while I carried the weight of her betrayal like a stone in my chest. I wanted to confront her. God, I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. But every time I opened my mouth to say something, I stopped myself. I kept thinking about my brother Mark and the mess he'd made when he found out about his wife's infidelity. He'd acted on impulse, driven by rage and hurt, and it had only made things worse. He'd told me later that he wished he'd been more calculated, that he'd taken the time to plan his next move instead of letting his emotions control him. I didn't want to make the same mistake. So I stayed quiet, biding my time, letting the anger simmer beneath the surface. I started paying closer attention to Jane's behavior. The way she'd glance at her phone and quickly put it away when I walked into the room. The way she'd suddenly started dressing nicer for work. The way she'd sometimes come home late with vague excuses about traffic or meetings. It was like watching a stranger, someone I thought I knew, but clearly didn't. And then there was Chad. I didn't know much about him, but I hated him with every fiber of my being. He wasn't just some random guy. He was someone Jane saw every day, someone she'd chosen over me. The thought of them together, laughing, flirting, maybe even planning a future, made me sick to my stomach. I wanted him to hurt as much as I did. No, I wanted him to hurt more. That's when the idea started to take shape. I didn't just want to expose the affair or confront them in a fit of rage. I wanted revenge, something calculated, something devastating. I wanted them to feel the same sense of betrayal, the same helplessness, the same crushing weight of knowing their lives were falling apart because of their own choices. But how? I spent hours brainstorming, jotting down ideas and discarding them just as quickly. I thought about exposing them at work, but that felt too messy. I considered confronting Chad directly, but that seemed too impulsive. And then it hit me. Chad had a wife, Sarah. I didn't know much about her, but I remember Jane mentioning her once or twice. She was a teacher, quiet but kind, the kind of person who didn't deserve to be dragged into this mess. But then again, neither did I. If Chad thought it was okay to destroy my marriage, maybe it was time he got a taste of his own medicine. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Sarah deserved to know the truth, and maybe, just maybe, she'd be willing to help me bring their little affair crashing down. It was a long shot, but it was the best plan I had. I didn't know what I'd say to her or how she'd react, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, and I was willing to do whatever it took to make sure Jane and Chad paid for what they'd done. The idea of reaching out to Sarah felt like a long shot, but it was the only plan I had that didn't involve screaming, breaking things, or doing something I'd regret. Still, the thought of contacting her made my stomach churn. What if she didn't believe me? What if she blamed me for Chad's actions? What if she was just as complicit in the affair as he was? I spent hours crafting a message, typing and deleting sentences, trying to strike the right tone. I didn't want to come across as desperate or unhinged, but I also didn't want to downplay the gravity of the situation. Finally, I settled on something simple and direct. Hi, Sarah. This might seem out of the blue, but I think we need to talk. It's about Chad and my wife, Jane. Can we set up a time to speak? I hit send before I could second guess myself, then immediately regretted it. What if she ignored me? What if she told Chad and he warned Jane? I stared at my phone, waiting for a response that felt like it would never come. But then, less than an hour later, my phone buzzed. I'm free tonight after 8. Can we talk then? Her reply was calm, almost businesslike, which surprised me. I'd expected hesitation, maybe even denial, but not this. I agreed to the time and spent the rest of the day rehearsing what I'd say, trying to prepare myself for every possible reaction. When the time came, I dialed her number, my hands trembling. She answered on the second ring. Hi, she said, her voice steady but guarded. This is Sarah. Hi, Sarah, I began, my throat dry. I'm sorry to reach out like this, but I think you deserve to know the truth. I found out that my wife, Jane, has been having an affair with Chad. I have proof, messages, plans to meet up, everything. I thought you should know. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought she'd hung up. But then she spoke, her voice calm but laced with something I couldn't quite place. Anger, maybe, or resignation. I know, she said quietly. I froze. You know? Yes, she replied. I've suspected for a while. Chad's been distant, coming home late, always on his phone. I've tried to ignore it, to convince myself I was imagining things, but she trailed off and I could hear the pain in her voice. I didn't know what to say. I'd expected tears, denial, maybe even anger directed at me. But this calm acknowledgement threw me off balance. I'm sorry, I said finally, because it was the only thing I could think of. Don't be, she replied, her tone hardening. This isn't your fault. It's theirs. And honestly, I'm tired of pretending everything's fine. I'm tired of being lied to. Her words resonated with me in a way I hadn't expected. Here was someone who understood exactly what I was feeling, the betrayal, the anger, the helplessness. And she wasn't just willing to listen, she was ready to act. What do you want to do? I asked, almost afraid of the answer. There was another pause, and then she said something that caught me completely off guard. I want to make them pay. Her voice was steady, but there was a fire behind it that sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just anger talking. This was determination. What do you mean? I asked, though I already had an idea. I mean, she said slowly, that I want to give them a taste of their own medicine. I want them to feel the same humiliation, the same pain that we're feeling, and I think I know how we can do it. She laid out her plan, and as I listened, I felt a strange mix of emotions, shock, admiration, and a growing sense of excitement. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. And Sarah wasn't just an ally. She was a force to be reckoned with. By the end of the call, we had a plan. It was risky, maybe even a little crazy, but it was perfect. For the first time since I discovered the affair, I felt like I had control again. Sarah's plan was as bold as it was brilliant. And the more we talked about it, the more I realized she'd been thinking about this for a while. It wasn't just a spur of the moment idea. It was calculated, precise, and designed to hit Jane and Chad where it would hurt the most. We'll set up a double date, Sarah explained, her voice steady but laced with determination. But not just any double date. We'll make sure Jane and Chad are there too, and we'll make it look like we're the ones cheating. They'll see us together, holding hands, laughing, maybe even kissing. It'll mess with their heads, make them question everything. And then, when they confront us, we'll turn the tables. I was stunned. It was devious, yes, but also poetic in a way. They'd spent months sneaking around, lying to our faces, and now we'd give them a taste of their own medicine. Still, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of hesitation. What if it backfires? I asked. What if they don't care? Or worse, what if they use it against us? Sarah was quiet for a moment, then said, "They'll care. Trust me. People like them thrive on control. They think they're untouchable, that they can do whatever they want without consequences. But when they see us together, when they realize we know everything, it'll shatter that illusion. And as for using it against us," she paused, and I could almost hear the smirk in her voice. "We'll have the upper hand. We'll be the ones holding the cards." Her confidence was contagious, and for the first time since I discovered the affair, I felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming our power, our dignity. Over the next few days, we worked out the details. We needed to find the perfect time and place, somewhere Jane and Chad would feel safe, somewhere they'd let their guard down. Sarah suggested a swanky bar on the other side of town, a place Chad had mentioned in one of his messages to Jane. "They've been there before," she said. "It's their little spot. If we show up there, it'll throw them off balance." I agreed, though the thought of walking into their spot made my skin crawl. We also decided to dress up, to look like we were on a real date. Sarah even joked that we should practice our chemistry, which made me laugh despite the tension. But as the day approached, the nerves started to set in. What if they didn't show up? What if they saw through our plan? What if it all blew up in our faces? I shared my concerns with Sarah, and she listened patiently before saying something that stuck with me. "This isn't just about them," she said. "It's about us too. We've been living in their shadows, letting them control the narrative. But not anymore. This is our chance to take back control, to show them that we're not just bystanders in their little game. We're players, and we're playing to win." Her words gave me the push I needed. On the day of the plan, I woke up with a mix of anxiety and determination. Jane was her usual self, chatting about her day as if nothing was wrong. She mentioned she was going out with a friend after work, and I played along, nodding and smiling like the oblivious husband she thought I was. But inside, I was a storm of emotions. Anger, sadness, fear, and a strange sense of anticipation all swirled together as I got ready for the night ahead. I picked out my best outfit, the one Jane always said made me look handsome, and tried to steady my nerves. When the time came, I left the house with a knot in my stomach and a fire in my chest. I picked up Sarah, and as we drove to the bar, we went over the plan one last time. She looked stunning, dressed in a sleek black dress that made her look like she'd stepped out of a movie. "You clean up nice," she said with a smile, and I couldn't help but laugh. "You too," I replied, though my voice wavered slightly. We arrived at the bar and spotted Jane and Chad almost immediately. They were in a cozy corner, laughing and flirting like they didn't have a care in the world. My heart raced as we took a table nearby, close enough to be seen, but far enough to let the shock sink in slowly. The stage was set, the players were in place, and now all we had to do was wait for the curtain to rise. The bar was dimly lit, with a low hum of chatter and the clinking of glasses filling the air. Jane and Chad were seated in a secluded corner, their heads close together, their laughter carrying across the room. They looked comfortable, at ease, like they belonged there. It made my stomach churn. Sarah and I took a table nearby, close enough to be seen, but far enough to avoid immediate detection. We ordered drinks, something strong to steady our nerves, and pretended to be engrossed in conversation. Every so often, I glance over at Jane and Chad, my heart pounding in my chest. They hadn't noticed us yet, and the anticipation was almost unbearable. "They'll see us soon," Sarah said, her voice calm but laced with determination. Just stick to the plan. I nodded, though my hands were trembling. The plan had seemed so straightforward when we discussed it, but now, sitting here in the thick of it, I felt a wave of doubt. What if this didn't work? What if they didn't care? What if I couldn't go through with it? But then I caught a glimpse of Jane's smile, the way she leaned in toward Chad, and the anger came rushing back. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Sarah reached across the table and took my hand, her touch grounding me. "They're going to notice us any second now," she said softly. "When they do, just follow my lead." I nodded again, my throat too tight to speak. And then it happened. Jane's eyes flicked in our direction, and for a split second, they widened in shock. She froze, her smile faltering, and I could see the gears turning in her head as she tried to process what she was seeing. Chad followed her gaze, and his reaction was even more pronounced. His jaw dropped, and he looked like he'd just seen a ghost. Sarah squeezed my hand. "They see us," she whispered. "Now's the time." I took a deep breath and leaned in, my heart racing as I pressed my lips to hers. It was a kiss fueled by anger, by pain, by the need to make a statement. For a moment, the world seemed to stop, and all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. When I pulled away, I glanced over at Jane and Chad. They were staring at us, their faces a mix of shock, confusion, and something else. Fear, maybe, or guilt. Jane's hand flew to her mouth, and Chad looked like he was about to bolt. Sarah leaned back in her chair, a sly smile playing on her lips. "Well," she said, her voice loud enough to carry, "that was fun." I forced a laugh, though it came out more like a strangled cough. "Yeah," I said, my voice shaky. "Definitely." The tension in the air was palpable. Jane and Chad were whispering furiously to each other, their heads close together, their eyes darting in our direction. I could see the panic on their faces, the realization that their little secret wasn't so secret anymore. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Chad stood up and made his way over to our table. His face was flushed, and he looked like he was trying to muster up some semblance of composure. Hey," he said, his voice unsteady. "What a coincidence, running into you guys here." I looked up at him, my heart pounding, and forced a smile. "Oh, hey, Chad," I said, my tone deliberately casual. "Fancy seeing you here? You remember Sarah, right? Your wife?" The color drained from his face, and he stammered something unintelligible. Behind him, Jane looked like she was about to cry. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression cool and composed. "Oh, come on, Chad," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "It's not like we're doing anything wrong. We're just two people having a good time, just like you and Jane." The look on his face was priceless. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Instead, he mumbled something about needing to use the restroom and practically ran from the table. Jane, meanwhile, looked like she was on the verge of a breakdown. She stood up from her seat, tears streaming down her face, and without a word, she grabbed her purse and stormed out of the bar. The moment she was gone, Sarah and I exchanged a look, and then, almost simultaneously, we burst out laughing. It wasn't the kind of laughter that comes from joy. It was the kind that comes from relief, from the sheer absurdity of the situation. "We did it," Sarah said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Yeah," I replied, still catching my breath. "We did." The bar felt eerily quiet after Jane and Chad left, even though the hum of conversation and music continued around us. Sarah and I sat at our table, the adrenaline from the confrontation slowly ebbing away, leaving behind a strange mix of emotions, relief, satisfaction, and a lingering undercurrent of sadness. "Wow," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "That went better than I expected." I let out a shaky laugh, though it felt more like a release of tension than genuine amusement. "Yeah," I said, running a hand through my hair. "I can't believe we actually pulled that off." Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "They looked like they'd seen a ghost," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "I almost feel bad for them. Almost." I nodded, though I wasn't sure how I felt. Seeing Jane's face, her shock, her tears, had stirred up a whirlwind of emotions. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant, to revel in the fact that we turned the tables on them. But another part of me felt hollow, like the victory had come at a cost I wasn't ready to acknowledge. We stayed at the bar for a while longer, sipping our drinks and talking about what had just happened. Sarah was surprisingly calm, almost philosophical about the whole thing. "You know," she said, swirling her glass, "this wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking back control. They've been living in their little bubble, thinking they could do whatever they wanted without consequences. But now, they know better." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I shared her sense of closure. For me, the confrontation had opened up a floodgate of emotions I'd been trying to suppress: anger, betrayal, and a deep, aching sadness for the life I thought I had. When it was time to leave, I drove Sarah home. The car ride was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. There was a sense of camaraderie between us, a shared understanding of what we'd been through. "Thanks for tonight," Sarah said as we pulled up to her house. "I know it wasn't easy, but I think we needed this." "Yeah," I said, my voice soft. "We did." She gave me a small smile before getting out of the car. "Take care of yourself, okay?" "You too," I replied, watching as she walked up to her door and disappeared inside. The drive home felt longer than usual, the streets empty and quiet. When I walked into the house, it felt different somehow, like the walls were closing in, or maybe like they were too far apart. Jane wasn't there, and I wasn't sure if she'd come back. The next few days were a blur. Jane and I had a series of tense, emotional conversations, each one more draining than the last. She was remorseful, tearful, and full of apologies, but the trust between us was shattered. Chad, from what I heard through Sarah, was in a similar state, begging for forgiveness, promising to change, but unable to undo what he'd done. Sarah and I stayed in touch, leaning on each other as we navigated the messy aftermath of our marriages. We talked often, sharing our frustrations, our doubts, and our small victories. It was strange how something so painful had brought us together, but I was grateful for her friendship. In the end, both of our marriages ended. Jane and I filed for divorce, and Sarah did the same with Chad. It wasn't easy. There were days when the anger and sadness felt overwhelming, but slowly, things started to get better. Looking back, I'm not sure if the revenge was worth it. It felt good in the moment, but the satisfaction was fleeting. What mattered more was the sense of closure it gave me, the knowledge that I'd stood up for myself and refused to be a victim. And then there was Sarah. Our friendship became a lifeline, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's always a chance for something good to come out of the pain. In the weeks and months that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened: the betrayal, the revenge, the fallout, and the unexpected friendship that had emerged from the wreckage. It was a lot to process, and there were moments when I felt like I was drowning in the weight of it all. But slowly, piece by piece, I began to make sense of it. Revenge, I realized, is a double-edged sword. It felt good in the moment, like a release valve for all the anger and pain I'd been carrying. Seeing Jane and Chad's faces when they realized what was happening, that look of shock, guilt, and panic, was undeniably satisfying. But the feeling didn't last. Once the adrenaline faded, I was left with the same emptiness I'd been trying to escape. What I hadn't anticipated was the toll it would take on me emotionally. Planning and executing the revenge had given me a sense of purpose, a way to channel my anger into something productive. But afterward, I felt hollow. It was like I'd poured all my energy into this one moment, and now that it was over, I didn't know what to do with myself. Sarah and I talked about it often. She felt it too, that strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. "I think we needed to do it," she said one evening over coffee. "But I also think we need to let it go now. Holding on to it will only keep us stuck in the past." She was right. As much as the revenge had been about justice, it had also been about control. Jane and Chad had taken so much from us: our trust, our sense of security, our belief in the life we'd built. By turning the tables on them, we'd taken back some of that control. But now it was time to move forward. Letting go wasn't easy. There were days when the anger would bubble up again, when I'd find myself replaying the messages, the lies, the betrayal. But over time, those moments became less frequent. I started to focus on rebuilding my life, reconnecting with friends, throwing myself into work, even trying out new hobbies. It was slow progress, but it was progress. And then there was Sarah. Our friendship had become a cornerstone of my healing process. We understood each other in a way no one else could, and that shared understanding was a source of strength for both of us. We weren't just two people who'd been wronged, we were two people who'd found a way to rise above it. I won't pretend that everything is perfect now. The scars from the betrayal are still there, and I don't know if they'll ever fully fade, but I've learned to live with them, to see them as a reminder of what I've survived rather than what I've lost. As for Jane and Chad, I don't know what became of them. I heard through the grapevine that they tried to make their relationship work, but it didn't last. Maybe they realized that what they had wasn't love. It was just a fantasy, a temporary escape from the lives they'd built. Or maybe they just couldn't handle the guilt. Either way, it's not my concern anymore. What matters now is the future. Sarah and I still talk often, though our conversations have shifted from the past to the present, and sometimes even the future. We've become each other's sounding boards, cheerleaders, and confidants. It's a friendship born out of pain, but it's grown into something much more meaningful. I don't know what the future holds for either of us. Maybe we'll stay friends, or maybe we'll become something more. But for now, I'm just grateful for the support and understanding we've found in each other. In the end, this story isn't just about betrayal or revenge. It's about resilience, about finding the strength to pick up the pieces and move forward. It's about the unexpected ways life can surprise you, even in the midst of heartbreak. And most of all, it's a reminder that even when everything falls apart, there's always a chance to rebuild something better.